I'm Jennifer Croxdale, Program Manager of Arts and Letters Live at the Dallas Museum of Art, and I'm so excited to be with you all here today. If this is your first Arts and Letters Live event, I hope that you'll visit our website at dma.org/ALL for a complete listing of our upcoming events. We would love to welcome you back to our future programs, including our upcoming virtual event with the legendary Alice Walker on April 19th. On behalf of the Dallas Literary Festival and Arts and Letters Live, we are deeply grateful for your support. Dallas has a vibrant literary scene, and we aim to make it even stronger. Dawnie will be accepting questions from the audience after their conversation, and please join us immediately after the event for the book signing with Dawnie Walton in the lobby downstairs. Our DMA store staff will be there with copies of the final revival of Opal available for purchase after the program. Be sure to keep family and friends in mind. A signed copy of Opal will be a wonderful gift. It is my immense pleasure to introduce Amber Barbie Pickens, our moderator for this afternoon. And hailing from Dallas, Amber is an exceptional and multi-talented entertainer who graduated from the Juilliard School with her Bachelor in Fine Arts and Dance, and is an exceptional triple threat, having been professionally trained as a dancer, actor, and singer. Amber made her Broadway debut at Cirque du Soleil Paramore, and when the stages went black during the pandemic, she closed out a successful production of The Performing in the Wrong Man, directed by Thomas Kail. She received a first career credit listing in a feature film as a choreographer for the Sundance release Passing, directed by Rebecca Hall, starring Tessa Thompson and Ruth Nega. Her first casting of a major primetime TV drama was in Law & Order SVU, March 2020, in the role of Grace Presley. She is also cast in the role of Shauna for TV's drama Bronx SIU. To add to her diverse resume, Amber began hosting Kickback and Chat with Amber Pickens, where she chats with accomplished and emerging entertainers in the industry of professionals on their career journey, behind the scenes to glitz and glamour. She produces and edits the show herself. The chats are shown in schools and on local cable channels in Texas and posted digitally by Black newspapers. She launched her show with partner Cadillac in a chat with Corey Hawkins. Cadillac teamed up with Amber to host their daily Cadillac Power Lounge at the American Black Film Festival with actors and industry professionals. Her chats have included Spike Lee, Michael B. Jordan, Lena Waithe, and Cynthia Erivo, to name a few. Please welcome Amber Barbie Pickens.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I am just like super duper excited. I feel like a kid in the candy store because this book is so incredible. Congratulations, Dawnie.
Thank you so much, Amber. It's lovely to be here in your city.
Yes.
My first time in Texas, period.
Yes, I was telling Dawnie, I just learned, it's a fun fact, a lot of people don't know this about me, but I was born in Jacksonville, Florida. So when I found out that Dawnie is a Jacksonville native, I was like, oh, this is really meant to be. I'm super excited now. So as soon as Miss Sandria reached out and asked if I was interested, I was like, heck yes. And so, Michelle, thank you so much for that introduction. And I'm just going to keep yapping along. I'm going to try to make sure that I stay within the hour because I have so many questions about the final revival of Opal and Neb. I'm still in disbelief that this is your first novel, but congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm pretty proud of it.
Yes. I'm like super duper excited. And I should do a little bit of an intro about you as well, right? Yes. And so Dawnie's work as a fiction writer and journalist explores identity, place, and the influence of pop culture. She has won fellowships from the MacDowell and the Tin House Summer Workshop and earned her MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Previously, she worked as an executive level editor for magazine and multimedia brands, including Essence, Entertainment Weekly, Getty Images, and Life. Her short fiction has been featured on the Poets and Writers, Ampersand and podcast, and is part of Let's Play, Imagination, Intuition, and Black Creativity, an interdisciplinary exhibit of Afro-Surreal art at Oakland's Pro Arts Gallery. A native of Jacksonville, Florida, she lives with her husband in Brooklyn. I'm super duper excited to dive into this. I have so many questions. The final revival of Opal and Neb is so vivid and so immersive that I had to remind myself that I was reading a fiction, a novel, and not an autobiography. And there was even at one point last week, my friend was asking me about your novel, and I had to remind myself again that it's a novel because I started saying, "Oh, it's an autobiography about Opal and Neb," and I was like, "No, it's not." And there was moments when I was reading it where I kept going back to Google, and as a reminder, I like had to fight that urge to not. But it's a love letter to Black culture and to Afro punk, and it feels like a homage to the trailblazers and pioneers of Black culture, not just pop music and rock music and all of that, but a lot of the unseen artists. So it definitely moved me in so many different ways. So I want to hop right into what was your inspiration? Where did you start? Because there's just so many details.
Yeah, so it took me about 8 years to write this book, from the first words I had Opal say to when it was out in the bookstores. But I like to say that I feel like this is a book I was writing my whole life, in a way. As you said, I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. I was a teenager in the mid-90s and surrounded by music. My family loved music. My grandparents loved jazz. My parents loved like Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, the conscious soul of the era. And in the 90s, there was so much new music that I was curious about. You know, it was the golden age of hip hop, the early 90s. But then you also had alternative rock and indie rock and music coming out of the UK that I really absolutely loved. But in a way, it felt a little taboo for me to like it because I didn't frequently see images of myself reflected in that music, you know. And so I always kind of missed that when I was growing up. And then flash forward to 2013, I'm watching a documentary called 20 Feet from Stardom. Has anybody seen that? Yeah. It's about background singers. A lot of them, you know their voices, of course, like Mary Clayton, who sings on Give Me Shelter by the Rolling Stones. But you don't necessarily know their names or their images. And so when I saw that movie, the first 5 minutes of it, there is footage from a Talking Heads concert. And Talking Heads is a band that I've always really loved. And you see David Byrne, he's in the center of the stage and he's in his kind of boxy gray suit and he's being his weird David Byrne self. And then you see to the left of him, there are two Black women who look like they're just going for it. Like, yeah, they look like my aunties, right? They have short sets and micro braids and bright red lip, and they're so joyful and talented and just committed to that music. And I felt the strangest urge in that moment to stick my hand in the screen and pull one of them to center with David Byrne. And the image of that, those two people, kind of stuck with me in my head. I mean, I would think about them when I was washing dishes or doing chores around the house. And I just started imagining this Black woman figure who would have been really iconic for me at a time when I needed her in those teenage years. And someone who loved this music, but was at the same time very comfortable in who she was and like not letting others define her, like all these qualities that Opal has. And so Opal's voice came to me first, and then kind of the chorus around her started filling in.
Yes, and how did you manage that? Because I know when you were writing this, you were still at Essence. So how did you manage like your time and dedication to this novel?
It was really difficult. So my job at Essence, which I was so grateful for, it was a wonderful experience, but it was also, you know, it was like at least a 12-hour workday every day. And when we were planning Essence Festival, which is a big music and cultural festival in New Orleans.
Yes.
Right. And so
that's the biggest festival in America.
It is the biggest festival in America. 500,000 people in New Orleans every summer, every July 4th weekend. And I think they're picking up again this year for the first time post-pandemic. But the voices compelled me so much that I was waking up at like 5 in the morning and trying to get some words on the page before I had to, you know, get showered and get on the subway to go to my job in New York. And if I had energy after work, you know, I would write at night as well. And so I was sort of, you know, burning that candle on both ends. And after a while, those little fragments of time, they just weren't enough, you know? And so I decided to apply for a fellowship. And that's when I got into McDowell, which is a residency program for artists. It has writers and composers and painters and photographers, all kinds of artists. And it's in New Hampshire, and I went to spend 6 weeks there. And I could have spent as few as 2 weeks and taken it as vacation time, but I thought, now is maybe a good time for me to take a leap and take a bet on myself. I had really played my life very straight for a long time. I went to journalism school, and I just kind of steadily went up that ladder as a journalist for many years. And I thought, I was 40 years old. It's like, it's time to take a risk. So I went to McDowell, and while I was there, I learned about all the opportunities there are for writers. I learned about MFA programs, and including the fact that there are fully funded MFA programs, because I didn't want to go into debt for an arts degree. So when I left there, I applied to graduate schools all around the country, 11 in total. And I didn't care where I ended up. I gotta go somewhere. I have to finish this book. I just have to. And I ended up going to Iowa in 2016. Yeah. So went to Iowa, finished it 2 weeks before graduation, and here we are.
And what kept you determined throughout that time? 8 years is such a long time to be working on something. So I know it had to be something in the back of your mind. I was like, I gotta complete this.
I just loved the characters so much. And one thing the biggest piece of advice that I give to other, emerging writers, besides read as much as you possibly can, is that you have to really love, to the point of obsession, what you're working on, because that's the only thing that brings you back day after day. There's no guarantee that what you're doing will even get published, honestly, so you're just running on that passion and that love of what you're doing, and the love of the characters, and the love of the themes that you're exploring, and the curiosity. I often think of writing as trying to figure out something in my own head, and it becomes an exploration of not just research, but turning over questions in my head constantly. And so, that's what brought me back every day to keep working on it, was that curiosity, that obsession, and just feeling that there was something there that might resonate with people.
Yes. And speaking of your love for the characters, you mentioned this earlier that your first words were for Opal.
Yes.
Who inspired Opal? And then it's I'm trying not to get ahead of myself, because I just love how distinct and unique all the characters are. But who or what inspired Opal? And then we'll get into her relation with Nev.
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking of Opal at first very kind of physically, in terms of what her style is and her look. And so, and I was thinking of Nev that way as well. So when I was before I knew what the book was, and I just was thinking about these two people, my elevator pitch was, imagine if Grace Jones and David Bowie made music together in early 1970s New York City. That was sort of before I knew who the characters were, right? But I would say, as I got to know them better, so Grace Jones she's still in Opal's DNA in terms of kind of the style and the boldness and kind of being on the scene, that the way that Grace Jones is. There are three. So the second is Nona Hendrix, 1/3 of LaBelle, who were the first Black women vocal group on the cover of Rolling Stone. And of course, we all know Lady Marmalade, but they had a lot of great rock and roll songs, and they attracted such an eclectic audience. And I just love, their costuming.
Yes.
You'd see Nona Hendrix in a silver kind of spacesuit, and, Patti LaBelle with something with feathers all over it, and Sarah Dash. They were just so talented and wild and electric. And Nona Hendrix was the writer of a lot of those songs. So she was often the one who was sort of pushing them in a more rock and roll direction. And when she went solo, she was definitely more of a rock and roll direction. So Nona Hendrix was number 2. And then the third is an artist that we recently just lost, maybe about a month ago, was a funk icon named Betty Davis. I hear some murmuring in here, yes. So Betty Davis in 1970s lit New York City on fire, she had been a model, but she was also a songwriter, and she was married to Miles Davis for a brief time. Miles said that she was too wild for him, which I always thought was something crazy for Miles Davis to have said.
He seems like he is just
Yes.
the more I learn about him, I'm like,
I
I have
know.
no words.
And she also, we also have to give Betty Davis credit for influencing Miles Davis. She electrified his style. She gave the album Bitches Brew its title. And she really sort of changed him as an artist before she started, making music of her own. And she always called herself not so much a singer, but she was a vocalizer, and if you hear her music, her vocals are so unique. She's grunting, she's screeching.
Yeah.
It's not a pretty sound, but it's very distinct and very compelling.
Yes.
Yeah, and she was very, her stage show was kind of iconic. She was very bold in her identity and her sexuality, all of those things, and very just unapologetic about who she was and wouldn't allow her label to change her. All those things that I felt like would be part of Opal. Yeah.
Yes.
So those are those three, but then there were other aspects,
Yes,
of
I felt
other
like
artists.
so many different women.
Absolutely.
Like Anita,
Yes, I was thinking of Nina
Josephine,
Simone. Yes.
Even like Diane Carroll, like just certain interviews I've seen with her, I'm like, she has so many of these women intertwined in her.
There's also a little bit of Eartha Kitt in her as well. There's a wonderful YouTube video that goes viral every few months of
Yes,
Eartha Kitt in the garden. Yes.
I posted that
Yes.
before.
Yes. And the what does the interviewer ask
About
her
not
something about?
compromising.
Yeah, and she goes,
What do you think about
compromise
compromise?
for what? And
For
she
what
gives this
reason?
iconic laugh that is just, yeah. So
And that was such a big deal back then because it's
Yeah.
before women really had a safe space to be who they are and like speak up for what we believe in. So those type of women just really just set the bar to a whole new level. So,
Yes, yes.
I
So
definitely
those-
felt Eartha Kitt and Nina for sure because that's
For
exactly
sure.
how Nina
Yeah.
was in her interviews as well.
yes.
And then you have Nev. That's
Yeah.
like one is from Birmingham, Alabama. The other is from Birmingham,
England.
England.
Yeah. And I love kind of finding those connections and sort of seeing the ways in which Opal and Nev are similar and the ways in which they are, their differences are irreconcilable. For Nev, he sort of represents, in the early 1970s, there were a lot of British acts that, when they wanted kind of a soulful sound, or even like a gospel sound, like they went to Black American women to kind of add that to their sound. And so he represents that end of things. And I don't think there's no, specific artists that influenced Nev, but I was really kind of thinking about a chameleonic figure and someone who, would sort of have the privilege and the luxury to sort of change their style, every couple years and make it work, in the industry. So in that sense, I was thinking of like Elton John, who has a country album and has like all kinds of different sounds, or even a Rod Stewart who had a harder rock sound earlier in his career and then, was doing different things like doing Motown covers and all kinds of things, kind of like whatever works kinds of things. And then I was thinking in terms of his character, what that changeability would mean for that character, and that's opposed to Opal, who was very like staunch in who she was and her identity, and kind of like out of pure passion and will and stubbornness, kind of sticking to who she was as an artist.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I have a comment and a question I want to revisit about just their dynamics and specifically about Nev that I love. But one, I really enjoyed how you took the angle of oral history throughout the novel. I just love that so much, and it just reminds me of my experience living in New York City. How we're always walking around, you never know who you'll run into, and just all these stories. You could be waiting on the subway. The next, you've had this full conversation with somebody about their life or whatever. Like it could be a retired singer, a retired dancer. You never know. So was it your journalist background that inspired that, and how did you balance, I guess, and just really dive into each character being so unique?
Yeah. So I worked several years for Entertainment Weekly, and we used often the oral history format when trying to give the behind the scenes story on an iconic album or an iconic moment in Hollywood history. And what I always loved about it, in addition to the fact that you get such a blend of animated voices, and I mean, celebrities are very colorful, right? And there's always this idea that they are sort of always projecting the image that they want you to see or they want you to read, right? So, but I feel like the oral history format also gives like instant icon status to whatever's being covered, because it's like, here's something and a lot of different people have a lot of different opinions and memories about it. And it's also interesting how you see those memories contrasting. Not everybody agrees with the way things happen. And so I always feel like the reader becomes part of the narrative and trying to find the truth between the lines. Yes. And so, I'm often asked, was it always oral history? And the answer is yes, because I also just wanted to let the characters speak for themselves. And just get out their voice directly onto the page, always understanding that they are presenting themselves very deliberately, in a very deliberate way. And then, the goal toward the end of the book was to have those personas break down a little bit. So it was a little bit of playing with the form in that way as well.
I love how raw it is, especially in that era, just how they really just spoke their mind and didn't seem so refined.
Yes. I mean, one of my favorite pieces to write was the appearance that Opal and Nev make on the Dick Cavett show. And because I loved watching those old talk show clips on YouTube, and then it was a lot more, as you said, a lot more raw than it is today. Those segments now are very kind of rehearsed, and
they have a full meeting with their publicist.
They have a full meeting with the publicist, with the producer of the segment. Okay, this is what we're going to do, But in those days, it was wild. And Dick Cavett specifically would have, James Baldwin, and it would have like not just movie stars and musicians, but newsmakers, and I just loved watching those old clips and like figuring out what might happen if Opal and Nev were on that show.
Yes, yeah. And reading Chet's perspective sometimes was it made me like cringe, and I was even at some point like holding the book like this, like I was afraid to, like I feel like I was there and I felt that uncomfortability that Sunny probably was going through when she rushed to her car. Was that challenging for you to write a character like Chet? And was it any characters that were challenging? And where did you pull from when you were writing somebody that's like, offering this Black woman a Making America Great Again hat? I'm trying not to spoil.
Yeah.
So, just moments like that.
So, Chet is a bit of an extension. So the Bond Brothers is a Southern rock band in the book, and they're basically like Leonard Skinner, right? So Leonard Skinner is from my hometown of Jacksonville. They were the band that had Sweet Home Alabama. They used the Confederate iconography on their merchandise. And so, Jacksonville is a very interesting place. When I was growing up, less now, but certainly then, it was deeply segregated. Just as an example, so Leonard Skinner graduated from Robert E. Lee High, which was my neighborhood school, and they just changed the name of that school last year, right? So the other thing was that I was writing a lot of those parts at the end of 2015 into 2016, right? And that was sort of, yes. So that was, again, like the questions I'm turning over in my head. That was me processing real history that was happening in the background of me writing the book. And Yeah, like it was just me kind of figuring it out, and you know, I've lived in a lot of different places in the country, and the Confederate flag has always, of course, been for me very triggering. But it's not something that I've only seen in the South, right? And so in the 90s, I lived in Portland, Oregon for a time and was on a drive with a friend to Seattle, and the car had a flat tire, and we got towed to a gas station in Washington State, and it was a place plastered with Confederate flags, right? And so I'm thinking, oh,
Right.
this isn't the South. You know, this is signaling something, right? And was met with a lot of silence and cold stares, right? And so even before January 6th, you know, the book was written and done by January 6th. When we saw those images of the Confederate flag kind of march through Congress, was always something I was sort of thinking about. And the book is also just generally about images. You know, it's not just about that image, but also about the image of Black women in media, and how that might have affected Opal's career, how she might have felt boxed in by it, what she would have embraced about it. And it's just one of the images that I'm processing. Yeah.
And speaking of images, there's a moment where in the book A Tragedy Occurs, the riot at Rivington showcase in '74, and there's a photo that's taken of Nev carrying Opal out of the venue. Of course, it immediately made me think about your experience at Life. I was like, I wonder is this connected to her experience at Life magazine?
Yes.
But how did you decide what image you would focus on, and just what role it would play? And does it like drastically change their relationship?
Well, you're absolutely right that me even coming up with the idea of a photo being the image that sort of propels them is definitely from my time working at Life. So this was in 2008. Life magazine was resurrected as a website, as a photography archive. And there was a big warehouse in New Jersey, and we would call in like the sets of Marilyn Monroe or of, you know, Martin Luther King. And if you imagine all the iconic images that Life magazine ever ran, and think about boxes and boxes of negatives and contact sheets that are around that. And so, you know, my job at the time was to put together photo essays, you know, and tell the stories that these pictures are communicating. And it was interesting, along with the negatives and the contact sheets, there were also photographer's notes sometimes, typewritten on onion skin paper. And reading the photographers giving context to the images, sometimes it didn't always match up.
Yeah.
The story that a photographer has and what you might take away as an observer of the image, it didn't always add up. And so I was always interested in that tension between the truth and the image. And
I see that a lot in Harlem, especially with like Lindy Hoppers and whatnot. And it's sometimes disturbing to me because it seems like it was such an interesting time, especially the Harlem Renaissance. And you know, it's like that language where it's like only we get it, but then it's like somebody that's from the outskirts that are speaking for us.
Exactly. And you know, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes it's not exactly accurate. And I'm thinking right now of the most iconic Life photo, probably, which is the Alfred Eisenstadt image of the sailor kissing the nurse in Times Square after World War II. Nobody knows the real story behind that. You know, different people have come forth saying, I was the sailor, I was the nurse, them saying like they were strangers to each other. They actually knew each other, like nobody really knows. And so I wanted to have an image be the thing that propels them to infamy, almost like a notoriety. In the same way, you know, I was thinking about the photography, the photograph after the Kent State massacre in 1970, which sort of made a brief celebrity headline maker out of Marianne Vecchio, I think her name was. And so that's kind of how I wanted the photo from Rivington Showcase to operate. and for people to take away what they want, but for Opal, for it to strike her difference because she lived it.
Yes, and I love
Yeah.
that she got to speak up for herself and what her story actually was. It was her narrative.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times it seems like it's the white male gaze
Yeah.
and just the power of Black women in media in general.
Right.
And
Yeah. I was gonna say, but it's interesting for Opal because she, for many years before like this fake novel or fake book, she's kind of quiet about the photo because she also realizes it's the thing that puts them on the map. So it's complicated for her. It's complicated for her to figure that out.
Yes,
Yeah.
and something what I was saying earlier about what I wanted to revisit about Opal and Nev, I thought it was really interesting how a lot of times when I read things about interracial couples, you get a glimpse of what they're dealing with from the outside, but I really enjoyed how there was this moment. It was a lot of things in their relationship, but there was this moment where she noticed how he was being complacent about something and not speaking up. And she was like, okay, this is my, like, I see what's going on here. I don't want to say too much, everybody. But I love that moment so much because that's something that I don't see people exploring a lot. And I was like, wow, that's something that is such a powerful moment and a powerful topic in today's time. What made you go in that direction of like, just the lack of with him, like him not speaking up about something so important, like not using his platform and responsibility as an artist, like so many different ways so many different reasons why he should have spoke up in that moment, but he didn't. Why did you decide to go in that direction?
You know, I think that one of the things that I wanted to explore, like I said, is the similarities between Opal and Nev. And I think the core similarity and as well as the core difference. So they're both hugely ambitious people. And they both kind of come misfits backgrounds, right? But in different ways, they kind of have this preternatural confidence that expresses itself differently. So they have this ambition, but the difference is that, you know, Nev would do anything, right? And Opal has a limit to, you know, in terms of her principles and how she represents herself and her community. And, you know, Nev, if it will serve him, or serve his career, or even his career with Opal, because he does, you know, in his way, he loves her and wants to make it with her, the music and everything. But, you know, there are things where she's like, wait a minute, like we're not doing this. And he's like, well, maybe we should, you know. Yeah,
definitely. And something that we brought up earlier, so you mentioned so many greats, so many giants in this book that like the actual historic moments. You mentioned names like Betty Davis, Josephine Baker, Debbie Allen, which I love that moment. Questlove, Janelle Monáe, Diane Carroll, Pamela Greer, Sun Ra, Maya Angelou, Toni Morrison, Sarah Vaughan, Lena Horne, Lorraine Hansberry, James Baldwin, and even SZA, which is like a recent years. It just reminded me of the importance of representation. And what I wanted to ask, like, when was the first time you saw yourself in writing?
Ooh. Oh, wow. I mean, I think that's been a process. And I feel like I've seen little bits of myself through different characters. I mean, I think the first time, you know, I'll say when I was in 8th grade, we read for school, Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I felt a kinship with Janie in the way that she would dream under the tree. You know, I was an only child and very internal, you know, kept to myself a lot. And I think even now, my husband will tell me I kind of zone out, you know, in a way that Janie does. And also, you know, Zora Neale Hurston being from North Florida and the character being from Florida and all of that. So I think that was the first time that I saw a piece of myself. Yeah.
And what inspired the fashion? Because you were so specific about like how she was evolving aesthetically throughout the novel. Where did you reach for that?
I think again that was that came from Life magazine when I worked there, and looking at, so my beat, I guess you would call it, was, I did celebrity stuff, I did some news things, and then I also did fashion, right? And so having to look at an image of, say, Christian Dior dress and try to figure out in words what makes it special, what makes it beautiful, what makes it different. That was a real challenge because I'm not the most, fashionable person. But I love how people represent themselves through clothes. And, Opal, she calls her clothes her armor, and her best friend is her stylist, and her stylist kind of
artists in real life.
Yeah. He helps her to project the image and the strength that she wants to project, but he also, he's her friend because he sees beneath that. But he helps her be the best and whoever she wants to be, and I think she, Opal, for all her strength, she's a character who is ultimately revealed to be very vulnerable, as any real human being in life would be, and when she puts on her clothes, though, she's able to kind of fake it till you make it, and a lot of her career is spent doing that, and the clothes are a part of that.
Yeah, so that it's almost like that time where they go on the next tour, the second timeline. It's so important to me because in between those tours, she had the time to really figure out who she was.
Yeah.
She probably lost touch with years ago, but she had been so focused on the public persona.
Right. Yeah. And it was fun to write those parts though, and it was challenging. But I did look at a lot of archival photography, looked at a lot of Grace Jones, and then I had a pack of crayons. And I'm not an artist by any means, but I would kind of draw something crazy and then describe it. So working from a visual first and then putting the words to it.
Yeah. And how did you decide what historic moments you wanted to include?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah, and it made me feel like I wasn't going crazy because, like I said, I kept looking. I kept wanting to look at what, just any of the characters and whatnot. I was like, oh, this is something that really happened.
Well, it's so funny, when my book went through, so it goes through the line edits, they call it, and then it gets into copy edits. And the copy editor actually made an index for the book that has all the real people and all the real history. And I still have that stapled together. I just thought it was so cool that she did that, and it made it feel even more like, oh wow, weaving in the real and the not real was something that was very fun for me. I knew that I wanted the early timeline to be the early 1970s. I knew I wanted them to sort of rocket to fame there and in that time, because it was such an interesting time musically. There was, if you look at the Billboard charts, you have soul artists next to Laurel Canyon bands, and there was such a hodgepodge of music happening. And also it was sort of the very earliest beginnings of punk, and the very, you also had Southern rock becoming a thing, around that time. And I just thought, Rivington Showcase, which is the big concert sort of in the center of the book, is sort of representing all of those genres that were happening at once. And I was thinking, okay, what if you brought all those fan bases together? How chaotic would that be? And so that was sort of why I said it then, but also because I wanted it to be kind of moving out of what we think of traditionally as the capital civil rights movement and into more sort of, for lack of a better word, radical thought. Black Panthers, Black is Beautiful, kind of coming into that era, because I definitely wanted Opal to be part of that. And so that's why I set it in that era. And honestly, I would go look up different years on Wikipedia and think, oh, what's interesting about this year, and where do I see Opal and Nev reacting to it? Of course, Vietnam is going on, and so they have thoughts on that and they express that. But also, you know, I worked very hard. I tweaked the timeline as much as possible to get Opal in Paris for the Battle of Versailles fashion show.
Because I really enjoy reading about that. And
Yeah.
I just learned about it
Yes.
in like November. One of my neighbors in Harlem that was a former
Oh,
photographer told me
yes.
about the battle and the model Pat. He specifically wanted me to look at Pat and study her.
Pat Cleveland,
It's like
yes,
Pat
who
Cleveland, yes.
was so amazing. Yeah, so 1973, you know, it was an epic fashion show, a benefit for the Battle of Versailles, the restoration of the palace, and sort of pitting French fashion designers versus American upstart designers who nobody had any faith or confidence in. And so the French put on this very, you know, frou-frou show, very kind of conservative. They take an hour and a half to do the thing, right? The Americans come in, it's like a tight half hour, and they use this wonderful cadre of Black women models, right? Who just come and they literally dance down the runway in the clothes, and they're just so fresh and they're it, you know? And I was like, I want Opal in the audience for that. I want her to understand and see that. And also to just kind of like, I wanted to give her a moment of luxury and rest, you know, because she'd been through a lot at that point in the book. And that was me sort of like giving back to her in that space, as you said earlier, to reconnect to who she was instead of that image that had kind of been like put around her.
Yes.
Yeah.
What song do you think of whenever you hear like the final revival of Opal? Like, do you have a song that might have even inspired you, like a top 5? I know it probably wasn't one, but maybe like a top 5.
I mean, okay, so I think Gimme Shelter is definitely a song, just because I think it's been used so much to kind of summarize that era of chaos, you know? So that's definitely one, and of course, because Mary Clayton is on the background vocals there. There's a Betty Davis song called Dedicated to the Press that I listen to a lot and think about Opal. And it's basically her direct address to the media, basically saying, you know, you can say what you want about me, I don't care, you know, and sort of that attitude I think about a lot. There's a Nona Hendryx song on her first solo album called Toute Sweet Mademoiselle. That's a ballad, and it makes me think of Opal in Paris, kind of like walking the streets and soaking in that vibe and having that moment of rest and reflection. Yeah, I'm gonna go with those 3.
I'm gonna have to check them out.
Yeah, and because Talking Heads, you know, kind of sparked and their backup singers, Lynn Mabry and Edna Holt, who actually, so they've actually both reached out to me on social media because I've been talking about them so much, and they're wonderful.
Yeah, I love that clip of them like just dancing it out.
Yeah, it was so great.
After watching it, it was so hard for me to watch anybody else on stage. I was like, they're having their own concert over here.
So the song I recommend is Slippery People, when they sing the background vocals on that.
Yes. Yeah. And there's, of course, so many different things, but was there something specific that you wanted people to gain or walk away with after reading this?
That's a really good question. I just really wanted them to see Opal as a full human being and a fully strong but yet vulnerable, and you know, there's a lot of you know, kind of catchphrases that we use now, you know, about the strength of Black women and Black women are going to save the world and everything. And on one level, I really appreciate that, but on the other, I'm like, we're people, like we
have
break,
vulnerability,
you know, we have vulnerabilities. And so I think, like, I just wanted them to see someone who was in that position of perhaps fame, or perhaps they have a preconceived notion, you know, they read about Opal and maybe they look at another Black woman who was painted a certain way in media and they think a little bit more deeply about who that woman actually is. I think that would probably be Yeah. And I also just, I wanted to also write a book that was entertaining, that was important to me as well. I'm a storyteller, and I
Definitely.
wanted people to be interested in this story, even if you don't necessarily, I have a lot of people that say, I don't really like listen to music like that, but I still really found something to appreciate in your book. And yeah.
It's a little bit of something for everyone.
I hope
there.
so. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I have to make space for the Q&A exactly like I said, y'all. I can stay up here and talk like for hours. I'm so excited. So I think this is a good time to open up the Q&A. So does anybody have any? Yes.
I actually have a request, not a question. I need you to push out on social media the list of songs we should listen to.
Oh yeah. So there is a playlist. Yes, there's a playlist on Spotify, and I need to like put it up more. Yeah, yeah. But it's got everything from. It's got the artists that I feel like are similar to Opal and from that era, but also artists that I feel like they would have influenced. So newer artists as well. Yeah, yeah.
Sort of to piggyback on that, you began in the introduction that you felt it was an autobiography.
Yes.
And then you mentioned your copy editor created a timeline and data about it. Have you considered, not necessarily on social media, because I'm not a social media person, but on your website, creating links to, historical information, because that would be probably too much for the back matter of this book in the form for why you wrote it. But because you use images and things from history that propel you through questions to develop your story, that would be really fascinating, especially for writers learning to write. But also for people who are like, oh, I hadn't looked at it that way.
Right.
Let me go find out more.
Oh yeah, yeah. I actually have a nonfiction book recommendation that I tout this book all the time. It actually came out in October of 2020. I think it's called Black Diamond Queens by Maureen Mann. And it's specifically about the contributions of Black women to rock and roll music, Black American women. It is a fantastic book. So if you love the Opal character, this book gets into, there's a chapter on LaBelle, there's a chapter, of course, on Tina Turner, there's a chapter on Betty Davis, and then my favorite chapter is called Negotiating Brown Sugar, which is sort of analyzing that Rolling Stones song, and also the Black women of the time who were sort of the muses, which is a word I'm not a big fan of, the muses or the girlfriends of these groups. But it's a fantastic book. Yes. Yes.
Because a lot of times the muse gets mixed up. It gets blurred because it really should be whose idea it was.
There's that, and just it sort of takes away the agency of the woman and her own talent, and her. It's muse sort of puts it all in the context of what it does for the male figure, typically how muse is used. So yeah.
What was the name of that movie that came out in 2014?
Yeah, 20 Feet from Stardom. It's a documentary. Yeah. Yeah.
Before I even what was it? Me and my mom were just talking, and then before I even said anything about that, she was like, "Oh, 20 Feet from Stardom," and I thought that was really cool.
It did. Yes, won Best Documentary that year. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, you talk about making Opal go all.
Yes.
And what that reveals.
Yes. So Opal has alopecia, which is an autoimmune disorder where people who have it lose their hair. And so she develops that at age 9. And really, I wanted Opal to be kind of an ultimate underdog in a way. And I wanted to kind of have her not be conventionally attractive. I wanted her to be very dark skinned, which is something that would have worked against her then and probably still would work against her now, if I'm being real. And I wanted her to believe in herself and to believe that she can be a star, like despite all those things. And you know, Black women in hair, how we are about our hair, you know.
Yeah, because I even experienced alopecia with being so stressed in college, and I had a spot that was like this big and it was nothing there. So reading that and just learning how, you know, they just made it work, and that was her book was really inspiring, empowering.
Yeah, I wanted her to kind of lean into all those things and to be like, despite, this is who I am, and you're gonna love it. You know,
her more beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Hi. I was really thinking about how Chet seems to represent this holding on of the past. Good old boys to the good old days. And wondering if you had any intention from there to represent this willful forgetfulness of the past, particularly when liberal whites have either caused harm or have stood idly by while it was being done.
For sure. I mean, I definitely wanted, you know, when we think about, I wanted to think about the different ways that racism can manifest and privilege manifests, you know? And so Chet is, of course, like on an extreme end, almost to the point where he's sort of like the boogeyman. Like, this is, you know, if you think about our races, like, this is what that looks like. But the other characters in the book, like, there are different shades of it. There's different nuances to it. And I think that's certainly true of the left character. And I thought that, you know, with Chet, it was really interesting to me to, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but to have him be the one that sort of reveals that thing that happens that I can't talk about. Because it is something that is very ugly, but also something that is true, and that we have to acknowledge that it even exists, right? And so, like, Nev kind of obfuscating and, oh, I can't remember, like, yeah.
I tried to write it down spoiler free. So.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate it.
One of the things I loved so much about the story was just how vivid each of the characters is rendered. Can you talk a little bit about your craft process and how you were able to keep their voices straight in your mind because they're just so vivid and rich, each individual character?
Yeah, you know, I tried all kinds of tricks, and thanks for asking me that question. We talked about this a little in the car on the way over. I did all kinds of things, but one of the things that I thought was really funny was I would think about things, you know, how does each character curse? Like, what words would Opal never say? What words would Virgil never say? Because Virgil LaFleur is very elegant and would never use certain crass terms. You know, those things. I thought about the rhythm of the voices. Nev tends to talk in like a run-on sentence kind of thing way. With Opal, I was thinking a lot about, you know, Black women in a family. You know, and even though she is from Detroit, like, we're all a little bit Southern, right? Because of the Great Migration and everything. So language passes down, and we have things in common there. The British voices were harder to differentiate, and I, you know, watched a lot of YouTube videos about slang. I took a trip to London at some point by myself in 2015, and I would just go places and kind of either hustle a little bit and listen to the way people spoke. And then in graduate school, I was very lucky to work with Martha Livesey, who is Scottish actually, but had grown up in England at in a certain period of time, especially like she was helpful in Nev's childhood years and sort of thinking about, because I hadn't even been thinking about it being post-World War II England and what that would mean for Nev and for, you know, in terms of ration books and Radio Luxembourg and like all of those things. So it was a lot of research and just sort of reading what things back out loud and making sure it felt different, you know. There's a certain language to the Black church. So I was thinking about that when writing Pearl and her husband, you know, will he do it? Like all the right things like that, you know. So it was all those different things to make them feel unique and different.
Can I ask, how do you come up with the name of a character like Opal? Obviously, it's a name that's out of the box, just like she is out, you know, not confined to its one box.
Yeah.
So how do you do that and decide, oh, this is the name?
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember. I think that I was looking at like the nature of the jewel in Opal and sort of the translucent it has. If you turn it to the light different ways, it has a different look to it, you know. And I liked that she would be Opal, her sister would be Pearl, and her mother would be Ruby. I just love that, you know. So I think that's where Opal came from. And then I was just thinking of very British names, you know, for, you know, Nev being short for Neville. I was thinking of that. And then I loved Opal's stage name being a reiteration, you know, Opal Jewel. There's a scene with her and Nev kind of talking about that. Yeah.
One more question? Yes.
Thank you for this, discussion today. It's been wonderful to have you here. My question is more centered around artists oftentimes are critiqued when they choose to take on voices that aren't representative of their story. Mm-hmm. And do they have the authority to do that? And B, can you do that authentically? And I love that for your first novel, you've chosen to just dive in there and represent all of these voices. I'm curious, did you have reservations about doing that and fears for the first time, like how it would be received out in the public? And secondly, do you think that your journalistic practices, is that what gave you the confidence to maybe do this? Because maybe you envisioned them really as real people and therefore were able to sort of release yourself from feeling a responsibility of being rejected. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Thank you for asking that question. I do think, I wouldn't say that I was concerned. I would say that I took great care with every character. I thought about Opal's journey a lot. I thought about Virgil's journey a lot, especially because I was writing through Virgil's voice. I'm writing through the perspective of a gay man, right? And I wanted to take great care with that and make sure that I'm not writing him as a sidekick only. And Virgil tells Opal very plainly in the book, it's not my job to trip along in your shadow. I've got my own life, I have my own dreams, you know? And so I try to think of even the smallest character, I try to think them through and make sure that I was not careless with them or using them in a way that would just be like a joke or something, you know? And in terms of, I think that my journalism background was very helpful in helping me to think through all of that and think through different perspectives very carefully. And, the Sunny character, the journalist who sort of pops up through editor's notes and gives context of the story, is a character that didn't show up in the book until I had finished 2/3 of the draft, right? And it was just straight oral histories. And when Sunny came into the picture, when I came up with the idea of Sunny, it really allowed me to look at the story even more analytically and with a certain skeptical lens, and just to think through all of those things. And not everything makes it onto the page, but I certainly did think about it, as a journalist, as background to all of that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. But kudos to you.
Thank
on
you
that.
so
I don't
much.
think it's easy to do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rose. I want this to be over.
But Dawnie, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
sharing this
Amber.
journal with the world and just your passion for writing with all of us. And congratulations. This is just your first novel. I can't believe it. And thank you all for being here today.
Thank you all for coming.
So stop by and get a signed